More. But first, stunning court decision today. It sets aside the controversial new admissions policy by lottery at San Francisco's high-achieving Lowell High School. This is a story being watched closely across the nation as school districts wrestle with how to improve access and outcomes for all students. Joining us now to discuss that ruling and what it means is San Francisco District 4 Supervisor Gordon Marr on the right and the immediate past president of the Lowell Alumni Association and former dean of USF Law, John Tresvigna, in the middle there. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thanks, Christy.
So San Francisco Superior Court Judge Ethan Schulman ruled today on the lawsuit brought by the Friends of Lowell Foundation, the Lowell Alumni Association, and the Asian American Legal Foundation. The ruling being the board's resolution to go with lottery admission was not valid because the process violated the law. John, as both the past president of the Lowell Alumni Association, one of the plaintiffs, and a lawyer, what does that exactly mean?
Judge Schulman made very clear that under the Brown Act, part of our Constitution since the 1950s, public agencies have to do their work in public and not in secret. And he found that the board violated this important principle and said you can't change an admissions policy and not tell people what you're going to do. That's what occurred last year when the board abruptly changed the Lowell admissions policy and moved it away from its traditionally being an academically oriented high school to being one where you get in based upon your lottery number. And that's the position that is unfounded in the law. And the court correctly said the school district can't do that. So the court rescinded that policy.
So what does that mean, John, for the next school year? I assume the admissions process is actually happening right now.
The admissions process is happening right now. Eighth grade parents and eighth graders are wondering what they can do to apply to Lowell. We urge students to be interested in Lowell, come to see the school, get to know it. But it's up to the school district to now implement the judge's order. The judge took away the authority to have a lottery under today's ruling.
Supervisor Marr, what is your reaction to the ruling today?
Well, Kristen, as a current Lowell parent and also as supervisor that represents a majority Asian American district that has really strong and deep connections to Lowell High School, I'm looking at today's the court's decision today as just the latest example of major missteps, and really blunders by our Board of Education. You know, this is actually the second lawsuit the district has lost based on improperly noticed votes on big important issues. And when these procedural blunders are made, when the process is rushed, when shortcuts are taken, it does disservice to the students and families who are asking to be heard around some real legitimate issues. This lawsuit was avoidable. The distraction and just further controversy, you know, it has been avoidable. But I do want to say that there are critical concerns that Lowell students and their families have raised, including the lack of racial diversity and a culture that has failed to address sexual harassment and violence. My daughter was one of hundreds of Lowell students who staged a walkout last week to protest sexual harassment and assault and call on the administration to revisit cases reported over the summer and last school year. And of course, the Black Student Union at Lowell has poignantly and painfully shared their experiences over and over that show how our district and administration have failed them. So there are very real issues that need to be addressed at Lowell. Lowell has been a big success and a pride of our city, but there are issues that need to be addressed around racial inclusivity, sexual harassment and violence. But the school board's actions have unfortunately been a setback in really addressing these issues in a meaningful way.
I think most people would agree that it is a terrible thing when students have to deal with sexual harassment and don't feel properly heard, and when racist incidents, whether it's at Lowell or any school, materializes, and they need to be dealt with. But I wonder if you two share or perhaps have different opinions on whether Lowell's previous admissions process, that is by merit, or the current ethnic makeup of the school somehow contributed to those issues being somehow greater than at other schools. John, I'll start with you.
The concerns about equity, the concerns about racial justice exist throughout our city and throughout the country. Now, the district, what we do see is a consistent failure by our school district to support Black and Latino students from pre-K to grade 8. Citywide, the school district said 62% of 8th graders who graduated were ready for 9th grade. That is an abysmal number. And strengthening those programs at K to 8 would make a tremendous difference, not only for kids who want to go to Lowell, but for kids who want to go to all high schools in San Francisco. We have seen over the past few years, 10% of the students leave, going down from 54,000 to 49,000 in enrollment. People are walking away to other schools, and that is an indictment on the entire district's philosophy and programs and plans. We need better education for all kids from pre-K to 8. And when that happens, then you will have an academic high school that is more reflective of San Francisco.
Supervisor Mar, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And maybe just to add, I absolutely agree that Lowell's special academic-based admissions criteria should be evaluated and modifications considered. But this really needs to be part of a broader inclusive process towards the goals of increasing racial and socioeconomic diversity at Lowell, and really expanding academic resources and opportunities currently concentrated at Lowell to all SFUSD high schools. And I do hope the district takes this ruling as a wake-up call to respond to the urgent concerns of students and families with meaningful actions through a transparent and inclusive process.
You talked about amending the process possibly, and I don't have too much time, but I want to drill down into this just a little bit, right? Obviously, Lowell's not the only one. We have magnet schools in urban districts throughout the country considering their policies with an emphasis on diversity and equity being first and foremost right now. But can those principles coexist with a merit-based admission process? And if so, how do you think that might work? John?
Oh, absolutely. You look at other schools faced with COVID not being able to have their traditional academic policies in Virginia, in Boston, and other cities. They brought civil rights groups to the table. They brought parents to the table. They brought out educational data to say, how can we do better moving forward? Those are the things that the school district did not do whatsoever. And that's what we're really looking for is an open policy, talking and bringing people together rather than being divisive. Can certainly strengthen the programs at various middle schools and earlier in order to prepare students well for Lowell and for all the other schools that they would go to.
Okay. Supervisor Moore, what would you like to see the board do when it moves forward on this? Because obviously, they could have the power to make lottery policy again. They would need to do it properly. What does doing it properly mean?
Yeah, Kristen, I would urge the school board to really learn from their mistakes that they've made in the past year and pursue their what may be worthy goals, increasing diversity and equity at Lowell High School in a more thoughtful, inclusive way. And again, as John said, we should really be bringing communities together to rise to the challenge of addressing the history of racism and exclusion and disenfranchisement that have shut out so many. And shutting people out of that process won't correct injustice.
How does this coincide with the timing of the recall election happening February 15th? 3 of the board members are facing losing their positions. John, do you know how that's going to play out?
Well, it fits a pattern of, as Supervisor Mar said, of the school board members not following the law on the Brown Act, not listening to parents. We don't know how the school board will react. What we do know is that the judge said today there is no lottery law left for the San Francisco School District. So we encourage 8th grade parents and students to call the school board, let them know they want to apply to Lowell, they want to have the academic admissions back in place.
Look, this year's freshman class, they were admitted by the lottery process, right? How did that change the enrollment figures for the different racial groups? And, could you look at that and say it was successful or not successful, or are there other metrics? I mean, do we have data on how well they're doing in the classroom?
Well, Supervisor, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I know the district did release some data enrollment data for this fall semester that did show an increase in students of color, particularly African American and Latino students at Lowell. So I think that's a positive sign. And I certainly even notice it, when I'm either dropping my daughter off or picking her up this year. But again, I think there's a need to really for the district to create a more inclusive process and transparent process to look at how we can really achieve the important goals of racial and socioeconomic diversity at Lowell, and create a more welcoming and supportive school environment and culture for students of color, and also for girls and female students.
Ultimately, it seems everyone is supportive of those goals, perhaps different visions of how to achieve those goals, but this ruling does leave that conversation open for debate once again, as the board will have to take in consideration by the community as they reconsider their next move. Thank you both very much, John Tresvigna and Supervisor Gordon Marr, for talking with us today. I know we really don't have time. We can do a whole half-hour show. There's so many more elements of this to discuss, but my colleague Leanne Melendez will certainly have more talking to all sides coming up today at 5 and 6. So we do invite you to watch them. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Coming up next, the latest COVID-19 headlines with ABC 7 News special correspondent Dr. Alok Patel. We'll be right back. All right, everybody. Dr. Alok Patel is coming up next. So a couple big things today. Number one, Dr. Fauci says hospitalizations are up for the vaccinated. So we'll talk to Dr. Alok Patel if that is kind of a driver in terms of getting people boosted. And we'll also talk to him more about the latest with regard to the eligibility changing and also other trends and holiday travel. So if you have your question, ask now. Take a short break. And we're back. The FDA is set to authorize boosters for all adults soon, and it could be coming at a good time as several states are seeing jumps in cases and hospitalizations. Joining us now to answer your COVID questions, from boosters to waning immunity to a safe Thanksgiving, ABC 7 special correspondent Dr. Alok Patel. Dr. Patel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kristen. It's good to see you digitally.
Yeah, and be spectacled. Yes, you look great. And you can see
this is not a common occurrence.
Yes, exactly. No, I did notice, and I'm glad you have them on because you're going to need to look closely at our two truths and a lie. And folks, if you're watching us on Facebook, you know this is where Dr. Patel asks us a question, and we need to pick out the lie. And this is the way we get into today's headlines. So we're ready.
Right on. And you know what? Kristen's so good at this game that we had to try to switch it up and make it a little harder. And by we, I mean I did. So tell me which one of these is not true. Is it A, Arkansas, Colorado, California, New Mexico, and West Virginia recommended boosters for all ahead of the FDA? Or is it B, the 3,000 person trial for the Pfizer antiviral pill showed an 89% decrease in hospitalizations and deaths? Or is it C, more than 100,000 people died from drug overdoses between April 2020 and April 2021? Ooh. Which one of these headlines is not true?
Oh, goodness. You certainly made this tricky. So, folks, I'm going to need your help. A, B, or C, which one is false? I think A is true, because I remember taking note of some of these states thinking, oh, okay, did not expect that, but I guess that speaks to where they're at. So I think A is true. And I know B, the Pfizer antiviral pill did show a significant decrease in hospitalizations and deaths, but I don't know if that 89% or 3,000 person trial, if that's exactly the right number. I do know that we've had a lot of drug overdoses, and 100,000 sounds right, and it's tragic, it's horrific, that's a huge figure, and it's prompting calls for change and a lot of attention. So, you know what, I'm gonna lean C as being true as well. So I'm gonna go with B, but before we do that, let's check Facebook response. Oh, great, it's evenly divided between A, B, and C. Thank you, people. Let's just say B is the lie.
B is the lie, yes. And based on this deductive reasoning, something tells me that Kristen did really well on the SATs. And so, you know, B is the lie. So yes, the Pfizer antiviral pill in the trial was 89% effective, but it was in less than 1,000 people, not 3,000. I try to get you with the detail. You know, A is true, and A is actually updating as we speak right now, because I wrote this question a little bit earlier, and already right now, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Vermont, Utah, Massachusetts have all announced that they want to broaden access for boosters for all people above 18. So this is going to weigh. I'm sure this is going to make weight when the FDA meets about it, which is they're supposed to give us a recommendation at any time now. And C is tragic and heartbreaking and infuriating in the fact that this is such an ongoing issue. 100,000 people have died in the past year, which is a record, unfortunately, here in the United States. And a majority of these deaths were driven by synthetic opioids, including fentanyl. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is, you know, I think anyone can tell you that mental illness and substance abuse and everything associated in that horrific web has only been amplified during the pandemic. And I'm hoping that we can finally move past awareness and get into intervention. Once we get out of here.
All right. Thank you very much for that round. Look, I want to follow up on this. Dr. Fauci today said that hospitalizations are up for the vaccinated. That got my attention. For the vaccinated, is that unboosted people? And is he trying to suggest boosters are needed?
Well, I think I do believe that this is for unboosted people, because this is part of this is an important part of the discussion to say that, hey, you know, the immunity that's been given from the vaccine is waning over time. Now, there's a few important things to flesh out here, Kristen, is that some of this evidence is on the state-by-state level. And we're seeing these, if you want to call them breakthrough cases, happen in people above the age of 65, also those who may be immunocompromised or underlying medical conditions. And also, the vaccines were never presented to be 100% effective against catching COVID-19. They're still incredibly effective against preventing severe illness, hospitalizations, or death. That hasn't changed. I think it's important for the CDC to update these numbers so we get a sense of how many breakthrough infections there really are, what the demographics look like. This data hasn't been updated since August 28th. And back then, we had the numbers telling us that 99% of COVID deaths were in those who were unvaccinated, and about 95 to 97% of hospitalizations were in those who were unvaccinated. So yes, even though these cases are going up and those who haven't been boosted, we want to see more clear data. We want to see those demographics.
Yeah, more data would certainly help. But, you know, even without that, right now, the CDC is probably going to be, by tomorrow, approving the expansion of the eligibility. But even so, as you know, doctors have different opinions on who really needs a booster. Our colleague, you know, Dr. Monica Gandhi, who's on frequently with us as well, doesn't think what we're seeing supports healthy adults needing to get a booster. What's your personal view for, you know, how people should decide?
Well, personal view. So my personal view tends to side with Dr. Gandhi, because I would like to see the data, for example, what I just mentioned earlier, before I actually make an informed decision, and before, you know, I kind of take off my journalism hat and go to the physician hat. What I would tell my families is I want to see the data showing me that the immunity has waned or gone down to the point where we're seeing breakthrough cases in those young, healthy 18 to 64-year-old adults with no underlying medical conditions. Now, on the corollary, if we kind of look at what's the data we've seen from Israel, and the fact that this may turn out to be a 3-series vaccine, like so many vaccines of childhood, polio, hepatitis, so many vaccines that kids get, then I think there is an argument to say that we might need that robust immune response from the vaccine, and that might carry us for a lot longer period of time. But, you know, as of right now, Kristen, I think it's an individual decision. I think aside from those groups who have already been recommended to go out and get the booster, for anyone else who feels like they may need one because they're around someone who's high risk or they work in a high risk environment, it's absolutely appropriate for them to go out and get one.
All right, Dr. Alok Patel, thank you so much. Don't go away because we have another round of Two Truths and a Lie. We'll take a short break, but you can join us over on Facebook Live and get your questions answered. All right, Terry, let's get to your question. Dr. Patel, when will we be able to finally lift the mask mandates? Seems like people have the options to be protected at this point. I think they mean vaccine. So shouldn't we be giving people the freedom back with regard to masking? What do you think?
I would love to see the freedom back away from masking. And I think we need to see some clear metrics put in place about when those mandates can be lifted. And I'm totally agreeing with you, Terry. I think our public health departments, both locally and nationally, need to put out some very clear guidance saying, hey, 80% of adults vaccinated, or this certain level of local case transmission, we can lift those masks. Love to see that. You know, I think we're making a good step forward with vaccine mandates and saying, hey, in certain businesses, restaurants, bars, et cetera, when you have to show proof of vaccine, lift those masks. I think that's a great step forward, but I do want to see some more clear guidelines about when we can finally lift those, give people some hope.
Okay. We have 1 minute. Mark's question. I don't usually travel during the Thanksgiving period, but especially for those who have special needs or medical conditions like autism, Alzheimer's, asthma, how can we ensure a safe Thanksgiving if any of these folks cannot wear a mask as opposed to refusing to wear a mask? Okay, so they can't wear masks. They have a health condition. They got to travel. How to stay safe? Testing? What do you think?
I think testing is the way to go. Obviously, vaccine and testing is an important way to go. But honestly, if you can't wear a mask, there's a whole other discussion about if you're able to even fly. And that's another discussion. And so, you know, I've talked to some people who have underlying medical conditions or people who have sensory issues, and certain types of masks may be appropriate for them. Driving is always safer than flying if that's something you're going to do. But hey, testing, vaccine, and just kind of looking at your local transmission factors, where the community you live in, the community you're going to, all that will make an important part of your plan.
All right, Dr. Patel, perfect timing. We are coming back on air in like 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Hope everyone understands I have a 4K camera right now and appreciates it.
You look great. All right, we are back with ABC 7 News special correspondent, Dr. Alok Patel. Before we get into the next round of Two Truths and a Lie, can you answer Ken's question? I had a breakthrough case in September, Pfizer, 2 shots. How long should I wait to get the booster?
There's no actual guideline per se on how long you have to wait after having that breakthrough infection. I think this is a very common question. And the answer really stems down to, did you just have a positive test or did someone develop symptomatic COVID-19? Because I have colleagues who actually recommend their patients wait a few weeks if they had symptomatic COVID-19. But if you just tested positive, you can go out and get your booster. But I would consult your healthcare provider about this specific situation. But in general, I would say go out and get your booster.
All right.
Especially because, as I heard, it was a month ago.
Yep. Okay, so let's do another round of Two Truths and a Lie where Dr. Patel, through our quiz show kind of format, will let us know the latest information, studies, and headlines. Let's go.
We make this one a little bit more random. Tell me which one of these is not true. Is it A, the FBI is offering a $20,000 reward in its search for a couple who stole COVID-19 relief funds? Or is it B, Disney cruises will require vaccination for guests 12 and older starting in January? Or is it C, some reported incentives for kids to get vaccinated are prepaid debit cards, grocery store gift cards, and sports tickets? Which one of these is not true?
Oh, you really made it difficult this time.
And hopefully more fun and more intriguing.
Yes, I like a good challenge. So Facebook viewers, I'm looking to you because to me, these all seem true. I think I heard something about a couple stealing relief funds, and Disney cruises, I remember requiring vaccination. And I've definitely heard of kids getting tempted, enticed with things like prepaid debit cards and gift certificates to get vaccinated. But you know what? I'm going to go with B, being the lie, just because I feel like this may be one of those, maybe it's not 12 plus and maybe it's not January. Before I commit to that, let's just see what our viewers say. Okay, we got a bunch of A's, a few B's, 1 C. You know what? I think more B's. So I'm going to go with my gut and say B is the lie.
I don't want to accuse you of cheating, Kristen, but you're pretty good at this. But B is the lie. So it is, Disney announced this vaccine mandate for kids 5 and up. The reason I think this is so important is because more companies are coming out and saying, we got to protect people who are coming here. We want to not have transmission or outbreaks happen, especially on cruise ships, which we all remember the start of the pandemic when that happened. And this is also a cruise ship that comes out of Florida. And so if this is to happen in January to get fully vaccinated, those 5 to 11-year-olds hopefully are among the 10% who have already gotten one shot right now. A is in fact true. And, you know, the FBI reward was $20,000 as of this morning. It might go up, but this is actually horrifying and sad. And I would not be surprised if there are more cases of fraud out there related to the COVID-19 relief funds, which are intended for families or businesses who actually need them. And C, just like with the adult vaccines, we've seen some incentives all over the place. But the one thing I'll say as a pediatrician is I don't think a lot of kids even need the incentives. These kids are absolutely motivated to go out there and get a shot and get their lives back.
Okay, we have about a minute left, so I'd like you to focus on how to avoid a Thanksgiving infection. Give us some, ideas to consider if we're traveling or if we're welcoming people from out of town or considering going to or hosting a larger party.
Well, I think some of the things I'll say are the same things we said a year ago, which feels like a day ago, by the way. And, when we are traveling, always pay attention to where you're traveling from, including your community's transmission rates, vaccination rates, your level of exposure, and where you're going and what the rates look like there as well. Think about your mode of travel. Is it a busy airport? Are you driving? Because those also make a difference in terms of whether or not you need to get tested. If you've been exposed and you're going to go see a bunch of family members, maybe some are elderly, maybe some are high risk, maybe there's some young kids who haven't yet gotten vaccinated, it may be a good idea to go out and grab one of those rapid antigen tests and just get a test, make sure it's a couple days after potential exposure to give you a little bit of peace of mind. But Kristen, I think one of the most important things is to have an open conversation with your family, your guests, anyone who's coming to this holiday dinner, and just making sure that people are on the same page. Hopefully there's not a lot of debate happening because, Uncle Jim didn't want to get vaccinated and Aunt Mary's yelling at him because I joke around, but I'm hearing this a lot about families who are divided right now over the holidays because some chose to get vaccinated, others didn't. And, I think that conversation, getting those tests is very important. But hey, if you've all gotten vaccinated, have a great holiday that feels a lot like 2019.
And on that note, we're going to take a short break. All right, we're finishing up here on Facebook Live. You know the routine. We have a couple minutes left. We're off air now. Let's talk about this. I read that Greece is the latest today to add restrictions for the unvaccinated. Of course, Austria did so, right? Kind of a lockdown for the unvaccinated, except for essential trips. And Europe is battling cases. So I guess, I can't see that happening here, but and in fact, I think we're tweaking it the other way where we have fewer restrictions. But talk about, just what you foresee happening here and what Europe's lesson holds for us, because they seem like a little ahead of us.
Man, you're going to give me like a minute to answer this question, aren't you? So we will never get a lockdown for the unvaccinated here. The country would be divided in more ways than one. But I think the premise is who is potentially driving transmission, and can we isolate this group of people for a finite amount of time, a couple of weeks, to kind of break that chain. We tried this in the United States, Kristen, with the whole point of the lockdown. And, obviously some states locked down less than others. Some people broke those restrictions, and we're such a broad country that it worked to a degree, but in a lot of places it didn't work. We still saw a lot of deaths. And, with here, I don't think even though we won't have a lockdown, I think at some point our public health officials are going to have to get together and say, when can we finally say that, hey, this is endemic, it's time to lift restrictions. And my predictions would be when we stop having 1,000 deaths a day, which is not acceptable, and when our healthcare systems aren't being overwhelmed. So that might be after, a few months or so when this vaccine is available for all age groups, as young as 6 months. So parents have the choice and have the ability to get their kids protected. And people really figure out, are we going to listen to the vaccine mandates and do our part, or are we going to play into the risk? And I think there's a lot of things we're going to be on the lookout for over the next, call it 3 to 6 months.
Okay, all good stuff. Dr. Patel, you tried but failed to trick me and our viewers again.
I'm going to step it up. I'm going to step it up.
Next time. All right, thank you so much. Have a good weekend. I'll see you next week.
You too. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.